Hey there, everybody. My name is Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist, and welcome back to my channel. Those of you here for the first time, welcome. My name is Kat Bowser. I'm a licensed therapist. I'm also a writer working on my first novel. And on my channel, I like to talk about what I consider to be the heart of writing, which is the characters. And the heart of the characters is in their psychology. So that's the angle I'll take with pretty much everything I talk about on my channel. For you guys, this is a topic I brought up on Twitter and it got a lot of response, and I think it's fun to talk about. So that's what we're going to do here. And that my question was this: why is it that you could have characters like, for example, Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame or Scar from The Lion King, and even though they do these horrible, terrible things, people still love their character and they still enjoy watching them. And then you have someone like Hans from Frozen, who, as far as most of the internet is concerned, can burn in hell. And so I was curious, why, what is what causes us to go from, okay, this villain is a fun character, he's fun to watch, he's interesting, he's creative, to I hate this bastard, he needs to die. um, and I think it's a very interesting phenomenon. So I'll tackle the two main reasons revolving around Hans that I think is important. So the first one I'm going to mention first because I think it applies to a lot of different stories, and then the second one I think only applies to a few. So first and foremost, though, yes, spoilers for Frozen. The movie came out in 2013. I think most of the world has probably seen it, but just in case, there you go. So basically, Hans in Frozen is Princess Anna's fiance. They meet. She thinks she's in love with him. He proposes to her. She accepts. And then we find out near the end of the movie that he was using her to get to the throne. So, I think the main thing here is what I like to call a moral line. So basically, there's certain things the villains can do that we're kind of accustomed to. We're expecting them to be rude and cruel, dictator, that kind of thing. But then there's certain things that we're just not okay with. For instance, one that I saw pop up a lot in my Twitter post was violence towards children, violence towards animals. That seems to be one line that if the villain crosses that, it's like, nope, you have no more sympathy for me. I don't care about you anymore. You are no longer entertaining. We need to get rid of you. Another one is, and this is one of mine as well, is something that I think Hans does. And that is taking advantage of someone who is psychologically vulnerable, which Anna was. She's lost her parents, she's lost her sister, she's not really engaged with the outside world, she's extremely naive, and here comes this guy who takes full on advantage of it and doesn't give a lick of guilt over it. Yeah, I don't like him. I am a big fan of Disney movies. I always have been. And I always generally like the villains because they're usually entertaining and I enjoy watching them, even if they're doing bad, horrible things. But I don't like Hans at all. I hate his guts. And that's one reason why, because he has crossed that moral line. I think the other factor that comes into play here is when the villain makes it personal. So let's imagine, for instance, you have a random fantasy story that opens up and there is a village or a castle or something that has caught on fire, and we have our typical villain gloating and smiling and all that stuff that villains like to do. And we generally just accept this. This is what villains do. This is what we expect from this kind of story. But then if we take that same scenario and let's alter it a little bit. Before we see the village or the castle burning, we're introduced to 3 or 4 characters that live in said village. We get to know them. We learn what they like. We learn what they dislike. We learn what they do throughout their day. We learn about people that are close to them and people they care about. We learn about what they want to do with their lives. Then the villain comes in and torches the place. Now it has a completely different emotional reaction from us because we are not distant anymore. We are involved. We are face to face with the scenario, and it's It's personal now. And when you connect with a character and you make it personal, their struggles and their pain become your pain in a way. So now it's not so much the guy is a cackling villain, it's this is the guy that hurt my best friend, this guy, you know, now it's okay, now you've gone from entertaining to a threat to someone that I care about. And that makes a huge difference. Um, I think the other thing, and this is the second part I was talking about, that I think only applies to certain stories, and it really applied to Frozen, and I'm going to criticize the writing of Frozen a wee bit here. Hans is what we call a twist villain, in that we aren't introduced to him as a villain. We don't know he's a villain, and then at the end of the story, he essentially comes out as a villain. The problem with twist villains, or twists in general, is that a good twist, the viewer is supposed to be able to look back over the story and see the hints. There should be some hint that it was coming. And what makes a really good twist is when the hints are there, but they're so well hidden in the narrative that you don't notice them and it doesn't trip you up. But when the twist comes, your brain automatically finds these patterns like, okay, I see it now. I should have seen this coming. Okay. But you don't really get that with Hans. There's no previous hints, even subtle ones, at what he was trying to do. He comes across most of the time through at the very beginning as a legit, Disney hero type character. So I think that creates what I like to call emotional whiplash. So when Hans, they bring Anna to him because she has a frozen heart, it has to be fixed by an act of true love. So obviously they're playing up the true love's kiss thing. And so Hans is playing the part until he gets her alone and then tells her, "Oh, Anna, what if only there was someone here who truly loved you?" And that creates what I call emotional whiplash, in that it's very sudden, it feels out of nowhere. And because there were no hints at it, it feels very jarring, and it doesn't feel cohesive. It feels like they just added it in. And from what I understand, they kind of did. So I'm not against twist villains at all. I think they can be done very, very well. But you have to do them the proper way. You have to set them up. There should be, like I said, hints, subtle ones, some kind of foreshadowing that when the twist comes, you can look back and say, okay, yeah, I see this coming. Because subverting tropes isn't a bad thing. I love it when stories subvert tropes. But it has to make sense. And I think in something like this, you have to have some kind of, there has to be something telling us, okay, something's not right about this guy. So that when this happens, we're like, okay, all right, I see that now. That makes sense. Because otherwise it just feels kind of lazy and out of nowhere. But I do like it because it got me to talk about this topic. Is villains are fun. And I just want to reiterate, I have no problem with a villain that you absolutely despise. I think that can be a great villain. I generally prefer villains that aren't redeemed. So I like this kind of villain. But I also think that it's important to realize what kind of villain you're writing. Because a lot of times when people try to force redemption arcs on villains that don't earn them, this is part of the problem, is that they've done things that in the reader's mind are completely irredeemable. And so when the redemption arc is forced, it feels forced. And we end up not liking the story arc because we can't get behind this change of character. So I just wanted to talk about this a little bit because I think it's interesting. I would love to know your guys' thoughts on this. Please make sure to leave some comments below. I will respond to them as soon as I can. If you like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss when I upload. I upload every Friday, every Sunday. And if you guys have comments or suggestions, make sure to leave them below and I will get to them as soon as I can. And until next time, I hope you guys have a good one.